So Alan, thank you so much for taking your very busy time out of your kind of crazy daily schedule to be with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
First, I'd like to ask you, of course, we want to ask you about Tokyo Vice 1 and 2 because you're the executive producer from the beginning. But I want you to share with us your personal story, why you got involved in Japan, why you got interested in Japan.
I'm happy to do that, but if I may, Yuko, may I first introduce, we have a couple of members of our Tokyo Vice company here.
Of course,
so
yes,
before we
that's
get
exciting.
too deep, I wanted to be able to introduce, we're so happy to have with us here one of our two brilliant directors of photography, Daniel Satinoff.
Thank you for coming.
And we have two members of our gorgeous cast. First, we have Eugene Nomura, who plays the role of Kobayashi.
Thank you.
You all probably saw him get arrested in episode 3. And then Aoi Takeya, who is new this season, playing the role of Jason, who's been getting intimate with our character Trendy over the past few episodes.
No, that's wonderful. I know Eugene personally, and but then I don't call him Eugene, but Kobayashi,
Yeah.
Yakuza guy.
He'll always be Kobayashi to me.
So, as I explained a little bit, you spent 3 months in Nara Prefecture when you were a high school student, and you went to Yale University, majoring in Japanese literature and linguistics, culture as well. And you went on to do some Japanese filming businesses as well. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's funny because I like to say that I didn't choose Japan, Japan chose me, because I had participated in a competition in my high school to become the foreign exchange student for that summer, but it was a program called American Field Service, I think it's still around, where you didn't choose the country that you went to. You won the competition in your high school, and then supposedly the company would match you with the perfect family somewhere in the world. I'm not sure how thorough their research was, but I was like praying to go to France because I had studied French in high school. And about 3 weeks before leaving, I got a packet in the mail and it said, "Congratulations, here's your new family." And it was this beautiful Japanese family in the beautiful ancient capital of Nara. And I dove in, and over the course of those 3 months, I fell in love with the country, the language, and with that family, who now, nearly 50 years later, I'm still very close with.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that was the beginning, and then when I entered Yale, I had always been a movie-struck and stage-struck kid. I always wanted to work in entertainment in some level, and so I had thought to be a drama major, like most stage-struck kids want to do. And my parents, very smartly, they said, "We don't care if you're pre-law or pre-med, but we're spending a lot of money, study something academic. You can always do drama school after." And it was their only request. And I said, "Okay, then I'm gonna study Japanese literature." And they were like, "Fine, that's great." And that's how I chose to pursue that path, and it really changed everything in my life. So that when my junior year, as you mentioned, I was living in Tokyo, studying the language, had a good Japanese friend who was a film buff, and I had known sort of the greatest hits of Japanese cinema, a little Kurosawa, a little Mizoguchi, Ozu, but through my friend, we used to go to these all-night quadruple features in Shinjuku because you had to have something to do until the trains start running again in the morning in Tokyo. And that's how I had a crash course in Japanese cinema, particularly of the 60s and 70s. So that when I got out of school and was pursuing a theatrical career on the side, my day job was running the film program at the Japan Society in New York, kind of the counterpart of Japan House LA in New York. And through a couple of years planning all their retrospectives of Japanese directors and actors, I became very familiar with the film canon and also with many of the creative people working in the Japanese industry then. So cut to 1984, when Paul Schrader was going to go to Japan to make his epical film about Yukio Mishima, we had some mutual acquaintances who said, "You should talk to Alan." And I was film struck. This was the man who had written Taxi Driver and Raging Bull. I was summoned to meet with him, and we had a long conversation, at the end of which he said, "Okay," because Paul's very gruff. He said, okay, I want you to quit your job, drop what you're doing, come to Japan with me for a year, we'll make this film together, and I'll make you the associate producer. And I said, can I think about it? Even though in my mind I knew, I knew it was good. So the next day I called, I said yes, and I left my job at Japan Society, and went to Japan with Paul for a year and made the movie, and that's when I figured out what I wanted to do when I grew up, and that's how I became a filmmaker.
Right, and the another movie that you did with Paul Schrader was Black.
That was, yeah, with Ridley Scott.
Black Rain.
Black Rain, yeah.
Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
And it's about Yakuza, too.
Yes, it is. I mean, Black Rain was a big hit, and it was a wonderful experience in getting to work with Michael Douglas and Andy Garcia and Ridley, of course, and, of course, Ken Takakura, and, of course, Yusaku Matsuda, who
passed away.
Yeah, I can't even.
Almost immediately after.
We became very close, and
Right.
it was his last film. And during the end of the film, that film had tremendous problems in Japan. That was my example of how not to make a film in Japan, because it was Paramount saying, we have lots of American money, we're going to throw it at you all, and you're going to do what we want. And that doesn't work. It's not. You cannot just throw money at people in Japan. There are ways that things must be done, and I was the guy stuck in the middle of the cultures. I was basically the messenger that everybody wanted to shoot, is what I like to say on that film. But I forged these indelible relationships. And yes, that film presents a stylized version of the Yakuza that much more akin to the kind of exoticized Japan that was still, this was 1989, and it was still the best way to present Japanese culture to an American audience was still to sort of stylize, exoticize a little bit. But it's a film that holds up very well, and that I was happy to find out that Japanese audiences are very fond of as well.
Right, and it was filmed in Osaka as opposed to Tokyo. You initially wanted to do it in Tokyo, but it was too difficult?
It was filmed partly in Osaka. Tokyo we knew was impossible. Everybody said, you can't shoot in Tokyo, they won't allow you to shoot. There was, at that time, location filmmaking in urban locations was a very, very difficult thing to do in Japan. Actually, it still is. Yeah. But so we went to Osaka, which was supposed to be friendlier, but we had epic battles with the Osaka police. We were shut down several times. We had, and it was a struggle, so that when we got to, I don't know how many of you have seen the film, but at the end there's this epic battle in these fields, these vineyards, with a huge Japanese farmhouse that belonged to Tomisaburo Wakayama, the villain character. And that was all done in Napa Valley, because it just became, we sort of ran out our welcome in Japan, and Paramount was like, how do I say it nicely? To hell with this. And so we built that Japanese farmhouse in Napa Valley, and that whole chase through and that final battle with Michael and Yusaku-san, that was all done in California. So, and in fact, as well, the one big urban chase scene, which is the scene in which Andy Garcia ultimately gets killed, where he's chased by, first by one Yakuza on his motorcycle, who was Ichida Yuya, a well-known Japanese actor at that time. And then eventually Yusaku comes out and they have that big battle. There was no way that we could film that anywhere in Osaka. So that whole sequence was actually shot in downtown LA. California Street, to be exact.
Is that right?
Yes, there's that underpass in California Street, and they put up a bunch of neon signs, and that's where we executed Andy.
Fascinating. And the farmhouse in Napa is already gone, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Dismantled. So let's talk about Tokyo Vice, because you've been away from Japan for 25 years, and you virtually come back.
Yes.
To Tokyo Vice and to Tokyo, literally. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was a slightly self-imposed exile, because after Black Rain, I was like, I don't want to be the Japan guy. I wanted to have a career as a producer and a director, but I didn't just want to be the Japan guy, and I was getting because I had done Mishima and Black Rain, I was getting all those offers. I was offered a job on, I don't know if people remember, but Mr. Baseball, the Tom Selleck in Japan movie. And I left and I basically said, I'm not going to work on Japan-related projects. And that ended up being 25 years. And I had been feeling in recent years, I started going back to Japan. I had been feeling that I had this exposure and this skill set and a country that I love, and I really was looking for an opportunity to go back. And just as I was feeling that way, my friends at Fifth Season, our studio that makes Tokyo Vice, approached me about joining the project. I don't know how many people know, but it's based on a best-selling memoir written by Jake Adelstein, the character that Ansel Elgort plays in the show. And the memoir was a bestseller in the US, huge bestseller in France, never published in Japan because he names names of Yakuza in it. So no Japanese publishing house would touch it. But one of our executive producers on the show, a very accomplished producer named John Lesher, Oscar winner, et cetera, had optioned the book when it was in manuscript and spent 10 years with Jake trying to get it made as a feature and not being able to finance it. At one point, Daniel Radcliffe was attached to play Jake, speaking of Harry Potter. But what the other origin story of Tokyo Vice is that when John optioned the book, Jake Adelstein, who had no connection to the business at all, said, only one person can write this story, and that is J.T. Rogers, who is now our writer and showrunner on the show. And the reason for that is that Jake, real Jake, and J.T. went to high school together in Columbia, Missouri. And J.T. took Jake was a little bit of an outsider, took him under his wing, introduced him to the drama club, and they became fast friends. And so he felt, this is the only man who knows me well enough to write my story. And JT is a Tony Award-winning playwright and had also done screenwriting, had never worked in television. But so JT was attached from the beginning. And then after a decade of not being able to sell the movie, Fifth Season had the idea to turn it into a television series, an ongoing television series. And they got it set up right away at Max. And that was when I was approached to come in because the original team was a feature team. And they didn't know episodic television, which I have a long history in. And there was nobody on the team who knew Japan intimately the way I do. So it was kind of like this thing that fell out of the sky. I'd been looking for an opportunity to go back. And they approached me and I joined, and this has been my long-delayed homecoming.
Right, and you've been, yes, you can applaud. Thank you. So the book that was published in 2009 by Jake is probably based upon his own personal story. So the Tokyo Vice series is not really factual. It's a fiction, but based upon partly.
Yes. We have a disclaimer that runs in the end credits that says it's a total fiction, but it is actually based on Jake's own exploits. And we heavily fictionized all the personages because, as I said, the main story that Jake follows in the book, which is a story that he broke in Japan that made him very famous and also a wanted man for a while, was about exposing a Yakuza oyobun, but it was a real person. And so we have very heavily fictionalized that into the story of Tozawa. And the story of Jake hunting down that story is what is really happening throughout this current season of the show.
How many of you have been watching Tokyo Vice? Yes, the vast majority of the audience have been following that.
Well, maybe this is a good point. If there are, because I assume not everybody is watching. I'm happy that so many of you are. But in order to catch up with the conversation, we have a couple of clips that we can show.
That's fantastic.
Should we do that?
Please.
So the first clip we're going to show is a 3-minute recap of the entire first season. So it goes very fast, but it will clue you in on most of the things that people needed to know in order to jump into season 2.
I'm a reporter for The Made Show.
What do you report on?
I want to report on what really happens.
The Tokyo Meiji Shimbun has 12 million readers a day. No foreigner has worked here.
You think because you're a foreigner, the rules are different?
I've been writing this story and I got no leads. 片桐刑事さんとお話しできればと思いまして。
Beer and sweets. This is how you recruit a cop. What do you really want?
この街の本当の姿を、裏の仕組みを知りたいんです。
The root of the Yakuza runs so deep. We can never get rid of them. Tozawa and his men have come to claim a local gang's territory.
これだけではどうにもならんこともありますわ。
石田に戦争仕掛けんの。俺と桜田門に喧嘩売ってんのと同じだと思え。戦争すんだら準備しておけ。
Sato-san, this is Jake.
What's it like to be a Yakuza? I could write about that.
Then I'd have to kill you.
You will write what you were told to write, like everyone else.
So what did you do?
I went through his mail.
Oh.
What are you gonna do? Call the mail police?
Maybe.
Be careful who you put your trust in.
俺が終わればあんたも終わりだ。調べてこい。それで手切れだ。確かに、お前は道を間違えた。根は真っ当な手下だったはずだ。表に出さずに罪滅ぼしをする。この取引を収めれば、戸沢は一生兵の中だ。
絶対に良くなるから私が直してみせる。
My paper has a few questions they'd like to ask you. I'm a very good listener.
That may be true, but you're also clearly insane.
重松事務次官、お越しいただき光栄です。大丈夫ですか？兄さん。
I'm gonna start my own club.
You should know who you are in business with.
I know the risk I'm taking.
This is a dangerous world. 宮本はどこだ？これ以上首を突っ込むなら、あんたの女房と娘たちには死んでもらう。
Good evening, Jack.
お名前何?
Paulina. Paulina. Didn't show up to work.
Another hostess went missing. Tozawa's got something going on in Yoshino. Paulina is there.
もう長くないと思ってるなら、俺はまだまだくたばらない。
Somebody has to tell the truth, and then things have to change.
I've got something you need to see.
Thank you. So that's the point at which season 2 began. And then at this point, we have now released 5 of the 10 episodes of this season. So the episode that dropped last Thursday was our mid-season climax. I hope many of you saw it because we're about to show spoilers from it. So just to catch up to where we are now in the story, we're now going to show the recap of episode 5 that will be shown starting tomorrow ahead of episode 6. And I will say there's a couple of things in the recap that were not actually in episode 5 or maybe weren't even in this season. And the reason they're in there is because they're bringing up things that will play out in episode 6.
Are you sure it's him?
I saw him hit the pavement. Before Nakahara fell, I saw Tozawa enter the building.
関西は全て戸沢が仕切ることになるのか。我々の次の狙いは戸沢で決まりですね。道具ならもうすでに揃えてあります。道具を親分に渡したらカイトから手を引いてください。
最高の夜にしてやるよ。忘れらんねえぞ。
Look, purest crystal you're ever gonna get. We know that Tozawa's got something going on in Yoshino.
Retro music. They're in theory.
Kanki no shogai. It seems Tozawa has it. Or did.
中原を始末するためだけに日本に戻ってきたとは考えにくい。他にも何かあるかもしれません。 変わんねえな。その判断力が千原がを守ることになる。いつかお前が組長になった暁にはな。我々は犯罪集団じゃない。この国の未来だ。俺は親分ではなく社長になります。
We have a big night tonight. Important guest. I'm offering a sheeted deal, and if he takes it, the club is mine 100%.
何か提案があると聞いたが。
Thank you.
So that's amazing. So the more you see them, the more intense and dramatic it becomes, and you can't just stop watching it.
Well, I hope not. But yeah, we took a big swing this season, and I think every episode, from the first couple episodes, there was a lot of setup going on, but now every episode until the end is taking it to another level.
Right. So you being the executive producer from the day one, covering both the first and the second season, and you also directed the last episode of season 1 and the first and the second episodes of season 2, right? So you know everything. And then you, by the way, killed my favorite character, Miyamoto, at episode 8.
Yes. We had a good time killing him, though. But he did make a brief appearance in episode 1 of the second season, dead.
Oh, yeah, right. He got killed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was hoping because big star like him usually continues on.
Well, that was always designed as a one-season role, and when we negotiated with Hideaki Ito, who's a big star, who played the character so brilliantly, it was always understood that he wouldn't be continuing because he has so many things going on. I don't know if he would have signed on for multiple seasons.
I see. Makes sense. So you visited Japan and stayed there for 9 months each.
Yes.
Altogether 18 months. What was it like each time?
Well, the interesting thing is, for us, season 1 and season 2 were night and day for a number of reasons. The first reason being that in season 1, we were coming in as a bunch of foreigners, gaijin being the not very polite Japanese word for it. The show was based on a book that no one in Japan knows because it was never published. So, and we were coming in and presuming to make a show about the Yakuza, which is a obviously very controversial, but in some ways treasured Japanese institution. Certainly, there's a lot of lore about the Yakuza. So I think there was an assumption, which wasn't necessarily inaccurate, that based on previous experience with international productions, that we would not get it right. So there was a lot of skepticism about people wanting to cooperate with us. And then on top of that, season 1 we were right in the middle of the pandemic. We actually shot 6 days of Michael Mann's pilot episode in early 2000, and after 6 days, we had to shut down. It was March 14th, 2000, and the pandemic had already hit much harder in the US than it had in Japan, so we were slow. But so we shut down, came back home, and went back when it was deemed safe, which was about 8 months later. Well, it was actually October of 2000 we went back. But Japan was still very heavily under pandemic restrictions. Tokyo was basically shut down. There were no new visas being issued for any foreigners. Restaurants had to close at 8 p.m. Bars were closed. Stores were closed. So it was mostly a huge challenge for us because people, vendors, and location owners did not want us. There is a, maybe this is not fair to say, but we, from the Japanese point of view, there is sometimes a feeling that is not wrong that foreigners are less hygienic because we wear our shoes in the house. I mean, who does that? And in fact, there was early in the pandemic, when the pandemic had not really hit Japan yet, I had several people say, well, you wear your shoes inside, you're going to get sick. So they didn't want us, rightly, traipsing through their establishments when we were in the midst of this thing that nobody understood the cause of or even how it spread. So that made it very, very difficult. So we were kind of pariahs. Nobody wanted to do business with us for perfectly understandable reasons. Then, 2 years later, season 2, the pandemic had subsided. Japan was still heavily masked when we were shooting season 2, but obviously Tokyo was back to normal in terms of shops and restaurants being open and transportation. But the show, season 1 had aired on Wow Wow, our Japanese co-producer, which is a very prestigious satellite channel, and it had been very well received, and people had seen that we had gotten it right. People had responded to the show. They had felt the show was exciting and authentic. And so we were suddenly, and the city was open again. So we were welcomed back with open arms. So we went from being outcasts to being VIPs between the 2 seasons, which was a lovely thing to have happen.
Of course.
Shortly after we arrived back, we were called to Governor Yuriko Koike's office, and she was incredibly gracious and became a fan of the show. We took Ken Watanabe with us. We gave her a Tokyo Vice happy coat that was our season 1 crew gift, and she put it on in her office and posed for pictures in it. And so
That's
it was,
nice.
we were officially welcomed, and it changed everything. So we made it our goal in season 2 to show much more of the city, to do things that wouldn't have been possible season 1, now that we had established ourselves and could negotiate at a higher level with the government, with the police, with the politicians.
So that's wonderful that it improved drastically in terms of the condition. When we interviewed Mr. Mann 2 years or so ago, he was also complaining about the meals, and because the restaurants were closed, and what was it like that?
Well, I understand Michael likes to eat well, but it's true. But the truth is, American filmmaking is the most luxurious filmmaking in the world. We are used to having craft service that will make new things all day long and have gourmet chefs and crews. If the food isn't great, the crew becomes very unhappy. I've shot in a number of countries around the world, and it's not like that in France, it's not like that in Italy, it's not like that in Japan. The money doesn't go to what the crew is eating, the money has to go on screen. So even in the best of times in Japan, your lunch is going to be a bento.
So that 仕方がない, can't
仕方がないですね。
right. So there are a few things that people are filmmakers are staying away from filming in Japan, even if they feature Japanese people, Japan, whatever. They often go to New Zealand or Vancouver or Lakersfield or whatever that is cheaper, and tax incentives and things like that. But you still wanted to do it in Japan.
Yeah, we made a decision early on that we were going to shoot everything in Japan. And also, just like what happened on Black Rain, at the beginning, we were told by veteran producers in Japan, both Japanese and some foreigners who live and work and film there, they said, you're never going to be able to make this in Tokyo. Tokyo is too tough to shoot. You can shoot some establishing shots in Tokyo, but go to Kobe. Go to Kobe, go to Kitakyushu. They have better film commissions and they're more film friendly. And we were like, no, Tokyo, this show doesn't work unless Tokyo is a major character in the story. And Michael was also very firmly in favor of that. And so we said, we'll do the best we can, but we're going to shoot in Tokyo. And then we made it work.
That's really great, because the scene is about Tokyo, the Tokyo streets, and you can see it, like it's authentic. Wow, you're filming it in Kabukicho or wherever, Shibuya, or so it worked very well, I think. But in terms of permitting process, another subject matter is that the permitting is really headaching.
Yeah, Tokyo had a reputation as being the most difficult major metropolis in the world to shoot in, and it's still very difficult, but great strides have been made. I think we've been a small part of it, but also on the part of some members of parliament, officials. Governor Koike certainly, there's been an effort, and METI, the Ministry of the JMA, there's been an effort to make Tokyo more film friendly, to create an incentive system, because there never was one, that would make Japan more financially attractive to shoot in, and to train more crews to work on international productions. So I feel like from here on out, change is slow, but I think it will get a lot better.
So in a sense, Tokyo Vice series, because you did it twice, season 1 and season 2, it helped people in Japan, including the government and other authorities, to realize that, okay, this is how we should work with American or foreign film crews. That would work both for both of us. Do you think that?
Yes, and
that's
it's
the
something
case?
that particularly I and our line producer on the show, a wonderful British man named Alex Bowden, have been working very hard with the film community in Japan and also with the government to try to make the incentive program as robust as possible, and also to cultivate culturally a perception that filmmaking is good for the economy, and it is good for the cultural exposure of the country, and it is good for being better understood, that is the narrative where most people get their cultural perceptions of a country from is film and television. And so trying to make it clear that that merits some kind of prioritization of filmmaking has been a big push, but I think it's really being understood now.
And people at large in Japan, were they nice to the crew? Like,
Yeah, well, our crew is a
Friends.
Japanese crew also.
Yes, right.
That's
So-
the thing we had. I mean, when we started with Michael, we had more Americans coming in, but it became clear very quickly that to function efficiently, you have to function as a Japanese company. So we had a kind of hybrid system, because some of our directors are Japanese, but most of them are not Japanese. And we are a DGA show, Directors Guild of America show, which means that directors must have a DGA first assistant director and sometimes a second assistant director. And that doesn't exist in Japan. So we had to bring in our first ADs, our directors of photography, like Daniel. But aside from that, all of our department heads were Japanese, and the departments were completely Japanese crew. So we functioned as a Japanese crew as much as was possible.
That's great, and I guess that you played a pivotal role in facilitating the communications, because you're fluently, perfectly bilingual, that some Japanese crew staffers probably don't understand English. And of course, your English crew don't understand Japanese. So they got to have the cultural interpreter, language interpreter, and you play that
Right.
role.
Well, for language, we had a squad of young bilinguals. They were usually either young Japanese, people who had been raised abroad, or half Japanese who had been raised between two different countries. But there are a lot more bilingual people in the city now. And so we were able to use these people to facilitate communication within the departments and between the departments. But the cultural issue that you mentioned is much more difficult and nuanced, just to make sure that everybody has the correct perception of both what appropriate behavior on set should be, what labor relations should look like, and then also that the content of the scenes is appropriate.
That's great to know that things have been improving. In terms of tax incentives and things, did you see the difference, or is that kind of still the span of a few years?
It's still in progress, but we work closely with VIPO. VIPO, which is the quasi-governmental organization, is the Visual Industry Promotion Organization, and they are the people in charge of the incentive. And we've been working closely with them. I'm actually doing a seminar through VIPO remotely, but with about 250 Japanese industry professionals in a couple of weeks. And they've been a big help. And VIPO needs to also generate support from the political world and the financial world to be able to gain popular support for a larger incentive. Because incentives are not automatically popular unless the body politic understands why it's beneficial to prioritize film production.
That sounds good. Setting aside the environment relating to pandemic, is there anything that you think that you wouldn't have been able to do for the first season, but could do for the second season?
Yeah, there are a number of things, but I mean, two in particular I can point out. The opening scene of episode 2, when we meet this biker gang, and Tats, the leader of them, we haven't really met him yet, but he steals a bike, and he tears off against the flow of traffic on a busy street in Kanda. It was in the Kanda area of the city. In order to get the permits to do that, it never would have happened season 1, and even season 2, that was a 4-month-long negotiation.
Wow.
We started planning it from the moment I arrived in Japan, and we had to keep delaying the shoot because we couldn't get the permits, but it was really an all-hands-on negotiation, because in Japan, like, in LA, you have, the LAPD has a division of movie cops whose real function is to make it easier for people to make films. That mindset does not exist in Japan, and it's really not, the TMPD, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department, doesn't really have that kind of jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is very local. It's the local precincts, the keisatssho, that have the control, and their primary obligation is to the residents and merchants of the area that they control. So they're not predisposed to pull strings on behalf of a bunch of filmmakers who are going to come in and close down the streets and inconvenience people coming home from the grocery store and then will leave. So it's a very different mindset. So the negotiation always has to be done with the local police. And it involves many visits from our fearless location managers, many boxes of sweets or whatever you, senbei, whatever you bring as a gift, yes. And it's always bit by bit by bit, you get from a no to a maybe to maybe a yes on the day before you have to shoot. But it is a painstaking process, and I don't see a way to circumvent it, because it's the way the country is built, and the country it's great because the country is built to value its residents in a way that is part of why Tokyo works so well. So I completely honor that, but it just makes it a much more laborious process. But we got that done. And then also in episode 6, which is dropping tomorrow, I won't give spoilers, but there is a sequence that takes place outside of Samantha's club, the Club Paulina, which we've seen the exterior of, but there is a big sequence involving police. I mean, you saw the shootout in episode 5. It's part of the aftermath of that, where we had to close off. That's a very busy nightlife street in Akasaka, which is a very upscale nightlife district, and we had to close it off completely so we could stage our extras and our vehicles from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. And that one, I think, took longer than 4 months. We had to keep postponing the date again, but we finally got the permission, and we were able to shoot the scene. And when you see the scene tomorrow, it's not like it's full of stunts or actions or shooting, but it's the fact that we shut down a street in a nightlife district to be able to shoot is something that nobody had ever done.
Oh, I see. So on the screen, of course, you see people walking around or whatever, but then they're all extra. They're all crew. I mean, not the ordinary.
Yeah, they all have to be dressed like it's the year 2000
Yeah,
too.
that's
So,
true. Okay.
so we can't let normal people in.
Right. Wow. And so how many hours were? So you said
8
that
p.m.
it's
to
from
2
8
a.m.
Okay. So
We actually had, I think it's this week or next week, we actually had a reporter from the Hollywood Reporter on set with us all night, interviewing everybody about how unusual it was what we were able to do. And the reporter's going to publish a piece about that scene to time with the appearance of episode 6.
amazing. Looking forward to tomorrow when it's finally
Thank you.
released. So talking about the cultural differences, you were talking about it, but then if you can give us some episodes between the working relationship between American crew, talent, and Japanese crew and talent, were there a lot of communications and interactions and going out for dinner or whatever on off days and that sort of backstage stories?
Yeah, I'm always working, so I don't get to go out for dinner. But no, I mean, the crew, a lot of our crew were from season 1. And season 1 was a bit of a rougher ride because we were new to it and because of the restrictions of COVID and because of not being so welcomed. So having lived through that, and now that we were able to function more openly and efficiently, the crew is very bonded and very attached to the show. And the few American crew members we have all were very bonded to their departments, and we always had people to provide language assistance where necessary. And our cast is, except for Rachel and Ansel, it's all Japanese. So, and Ansel speaks great Japanese now, and Rachel's Japanese has gotten much better this season. So they're able to intermix with the Japanese cast in Japanese. And of course, then there's many of our cast, like Eugene, and Ken-san and Rinko, who speak very good English too. So that there's a much more bilingualism between the talent, I think.
Oh, that's good to know. But they had to act as Yakuza, some of them at least. I wonder, because I know Japanese culture, but not so much of Yakuza culture. How did you make it truthful or authentic? You must have tried as much as possible, but it's kind of off limit.
You know, there's a law. I mean, the period that we're depicting, 1999-2000, was kind of one of the last great flourishings of Yakuza, and then there were some violent wars between the Yakuza, and the government has really cracked down with a number of laws over the past 20 years. And one of those laws states that anybody like us doing any kind of business with a member of organized crime is evicted from the country. So we could not have any official contact with any Yakuza, at least not provable, or we would have been kicked out. So we had to be very careful. So we have Yakuza advisors. We had 3 main Yakuza advisors, and they had all been members of different gumis, but they all had to have. Oh, I'm sorry, you'll see it in a future episode, but there's a letter of dismissal or excommunication with the right seals on it and everything that you get when you are officially either excommunicated from or part ways with a Yakuza group, and they all had to present those as proof that they no longer had any participation in the Yakuza at all. But we also have Jake, who is in real life, a rogue journalist and fearless, who has, over his 25 years in Japan, has made a lot of contacts. So as long as we keep everybody at arm's length, if he wants to go and talk to a friend and come back and told us what he learned, then we're not breaking any laws. So
I see. So you were in close contact with Jake.
Jake is an executive producer on the show, and though he wasn't on set, he is very much a go-to person for that period, for how the press worked and the interconnection between the press and the police, and then some of the workings of the Yakuza.
Wow, amazing. If I can go off a little bit of a script, I was always amazed by the tattoo.
Oh, in Tozawa?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's all over his body.
Yeah.
How did you do it? It's not a real tattoo.
Well, you see him more often, but all of the Chiharakai and Tozawa Gumi people have tattoos. You only see it when they take off their clothes. But we have a brilliant couple, the Takebayashis, husband and wife, who themselves had formerly been associated with Yakuza and had been tattoo artists for Yakuza. So they had really done a lot of tattooing, and they still work as tattoo artists, but they will no longer work directly with the Yakuza, so they would work with us very closely on the designs, so that each member's tattoos had a very personal meaning, significance, symbolism that was true to the history of that character, and then they paint them on.
They do?
They paint them on, but they do it in exactly the manner that they would if they were actually had a tattoo gun. For instance, for Tozawa, for Ayumi Tanida, the actor who plays Tozawa, when he has to do standing in his bathroom mirror like that is about 8 hours of work, after which he cannot really sit or lie down because there's a possibility of smudging. And so he will take like a 3 a.m. call in order to be on set at 10 or 11. And they all do it. Sato just has the sleeve on his arm because he's still not sure if he's in or out, right? So, so that takes less time. But there's a scene coming up in a later episode at a sento, a public bath. Most public baths in Japan do not allow anyone with tattoos in because that's the way they can keep Yakuza out. But there are certain places where they do allow them, and that's where Yakuza congregate. And we have a scene with most of the members of the Chiharakai in a bathhouse, and of course, we were able to have some extras who actually had real tattoos, but all of our actors, for that scene, that was like 15 hours of preparation.
Wow.
Collectively for the cast in order to be able to, and then of course they had to be very careful about actually getting wet. So.
That's right. So you after the filming is done, they take a shower and wash it off.
Yeah, well, the Takaibayashis help remove it because they have solvents and stuff, so they'll remove it.
But they have to redo it over and over whenever they need to show the...
For each shoot day, yes. Yeah, you can't, it doesn't last more than a day, 2 if you're very careful. And for that bath scene, they actually put special coatings on the tattoos to make them more waterproof. And we did a test where we got one of our stuntmen, and they put a tattoo on his thigh that was very intricate. And then we stuntman, so with the stunt team, they beat him up, they dragged him across the floor, they threw water on him, they rubbed their fist into him just to test at what point the tattoos would start to break down. It was grueling, but very interesting to watch.
Wow, that's an amazing piece of work, even on tattoo. Now, another thing that amazes us, of course, is bilingual nature of the series. So, of course, people like Ken Watanabe, Rinko Kikuchi, some others have participated in the Hollywood movie. So it makes sense that they understand and speak excellent English. But some others who I have never seen in Hollywood movies were still capable of speaking good English and switching back and forth, like they're speaking English at 1 minute, and then they switched to Japanese, and it came very natural, and was quite amazed, because it's not that easy to remember all the lines.
No, and we had very good coaches, and we had coaches who could work with the Japanese cast on their English, and coaches who could work with the American cast on their Japanese. The most amazing one is Sho Kasamatsu, who plays Sato, because in season 1, he didn't speak English at all. Mm-hmm. He was learning his lines phonetically. He knew what they meant, but he has a great ear, and his English is actually sometimes more intelligible than the English of some of our actors who really do speak English, because he just was learning it by the sounds. But it's incredibly convincing, and then people assume that he can speak English, and they start jabbering at him in English. And he's been working very hard on his English over the course of season 2, but at the beginning he didn't really speak it. That's
quite surprising, because it sounded very natural. Sometimes I wondered if a Japanese-looking man or woman may be Japanese-American who was born and brought up here, but I didn't think so at the end. But so their English ability was really high.
Yeah, I mean, Ayumi Ito, who plays Misaki, she speaks very good English. Hyundi, the actress who plays Erika, the new #2 hostess in the club, doesn't speak English great, but she trained very, very hard and was able to get there.
That's great. And also the two main American characters, Ansel Elgort as Jake Aldelstein. He didn't speak Japanese at all, but then he got trained because it was during the pandemic. He had time to get intensive training.
Yeah, I mean, Ansel is a musician, so he also has a good ear for mimicry. But we started shooting in March of 2020. I started him in November of 2019, working with a professor in New York who teaches at NYU. So he had already started training, but those first 6 days that we shot before the pandemic, he was still really learning phonetically. But with a very good ear for it. And then we shut down for 8 months, and Ansel kept working every single day. And the Japanese teacher I found him teaches at the Inter-University Center, which is my alma mater. And so I went to the head of the school and I said, I need your best person to work with Ansel. And Ansel just kept at it for those 8 months. So by the time we picked up shooting again, he was quite good at conversational Japanese. And now it's gone beyond that. He spends a lot of time in Tokyo and he lives his life in Tokyo in Japanese.
Really?
It's kind of
Wow,
incredible.
That's amazing. Yes. And also, Rachel Keller as Samantha.
Yes.
She didn't also speak Japanese at all. Her mother was brought up in Japan or has some association with Japan.
Yeah, with Japan, but she never learned the language. And season 1, we limited Samantha's Japanese because it wasn't coming as naturally to her, but she worked a lot between the seasons. And you can see in season 2, we were able to give her a much bigger share of Japanese dialogue because she was able to handle it.
That's great to know that American actors and Japanese actors that worked on respective languages very hard, so that it came out very naturally.
Yeah, I mean, I think Eugene would agree with me. There is such a great wealth of acting talent in Japan. And many of the best actors I've ever worked with, but the proportion of actors who speak English, which is really what's necessary for an international career, is still distressingly low. And it's the big leap that I think in coming years, and especially because people like Sho are now getting international careers, there'll be more incentive. But I really think there are so many Japanese actors who could have huge international careers if they could just get their English into better shape.
That's exactly the last question that I wanted to ask you, because there are so many people here and there in Japan, Japanese people who want to come to Hollywood to make themselves in the Hollywood industry, but the language seemed to have been a major obstacle, challenge. But do you think that it can be worked out?
I think that it can. I think that part of the handicap, I think, is that in Japanese public education, everyone has a mandatory 6 years of English education. And after 6 years of English classes, they come out not being able to speak English. And so, but that's really because their teachers can't speak English either. Many more people can read and write. Most Japanese have a very good level of comprehension in terms of written English, but they're not getting the right speaking training, and that creates a bit of a complex that they feel that, well, if I didn't learn it in 6 years of education, I guess I can't learn it. I guess we're not good at languages. But it's not that. It's that the education was faulty. And I think that if people can just apply themselves and have the confidence that they can make a leap.
That's very encouraging. But thank you so
I
very
believe
much,
it.
Alan. Yeah. So yes, please give a round of applause. Thank you. And we want to take some questions from the floor. So we do have a few mic runners. So if you can raise your hand if you have a question. Yes.
Given the dependence you had on the police in Japan, in Tokyo, did that color how you depicted the police in the first season? Were you conscious about that, or?
No, I don't think so, because these are very well-meaning civil servants who are doing their job. So, I mean, I think the way we depicted the police was very true to the police, and real Jake actually had his own kategiri. He had a Japanese police officer who served as a mentor and kind of second father to him, and we tried to reflect that very much. And so he had tremendous respect for the police.
Yes.
First of all, I think you could have had a very successful career as a diplomat, listening to you answer all these questions so skillfully, some of these touchy subjects. And we were chatting before the event. I heard Ansel say in an interview that he had to learn all the hiragana, and yet he sounds the way he sounds. We're like, wow, I wish I sounded that good when I only knew only hiragana. But my comment is, when I'm watching, as a Japan travel specialist, when I'm watching all these wonderful scenes, don't you think it would be a great idea to have an insider's Tokyo Vice tour, and with Jay to show us all these wonderful locations. I'm looking at these beautiful hotel scenes and things, and I think, wow, wouldn't that be a fantastic thing? Don't you agree with me, Yuko?
Yes.
We can get Jay and Tio involved, but I think this would be a fantastic thing to do.
I'll tell you one person who would love that idea, Jake. Because he's, as you know, he's not averse to the spotlight, and he would love it. It's, you mean sort of like the Sex and the City tours of New York? Is that kind of what?
Well, yeah, I mean, we want to see these beautiful hotels, and we want to go see some of these locations and everything. We're connected on LinkedIn. I'll message Jake.
Yeah.
We'll get it going.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I remember that when Lost in Translation film was released, one of the hotels that were featured became a hot spot for travelers. So I guess that.
Yeah. Well, the Park Hyatt.
Right.
The Park Hyatt is still known as the Lost in Translation Hotel. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yes, the lady there. Thank you.
I'm a big fan of this show. I was so shocked that Ishida-san was killed last episode. Ishida-san was my favorite. I have two questions. One question is you guys are at first planning to have a Daniel Radcliffe for the Jake. He's kind of similar height of Japanese guys and Jake, but Ansel is too tall. So is there any why Ansel and you guys have any accident he bumped his head so many times as a gaijin came to Japan? And the other question is why so many sex scenes in this show? Almost every episode.
I'll answer your second question first, because I've had people ask me, why isn't there more sex in the show? I think this season, well, just the last episode, we had a couple of intimate encounters in it, but I don't think there's really that much sex in the show for your standard noirish crime drama. I think they were very respectful of our characters and would only do that if it has a place in the story. Like, for instance, to call out Aoi, but the love scene that they had was really about the long-suffering character of Trendy finally seeing him find happiness, and the joy that we had in seeing him find expression and happiness, and that was the reason we had the scene. But in terms of Daniel Radcliffe, that's before my time, because I only came in when the show became a TV series. But as you know, or as I think everybody knows, casting is one way you get your project made. So you don't say, I need someone who is exactly 5'8". You look at the actors who will help you get your show made, and you see which is best for the part. But in Ansel's case, I think that it's a wonderful visual joke that he's so tall, because you can see him in a crowd of Japanese and you can see him. And so I think we use that to good comic effect, and he's very, very graceful. So I can only remember one time that he bumped his head.
Interesting question. Yes, to the left.
Hi, I'm an actor, and actually I did this audition and Tokyo Vice, but I didn't get it.
Sorry.
So, one question. If you give some advice to the actor or actress, what are you gonna say?
You know, it's very interesting because normally in the Japanese film and television industry, actors don't audition because everybody knows generally what the talent pool is, and you pick the right person, or the manager or the jimusho, the office comes to you and they say, take this and this and this, and then you offer the part. So I feel like the key to getting a role successfully on our side is a good audition or a good read on tape, and that is something that, because it hasn't been traditionally part of the Japanese system, I know a lot of actors have struggled with it. But I think it's really about, you have to, from whatever material you've been given, you have to construct the actor's entire life and just feel that you have internalized some version of who he is, so that you're not acting the lines, you're behaving as the character, and that kind of depth of thought generally comes through in a casting session. Like when we when we were casting the role of Nagata, that is Miki Maya is playing so brilliantly, it was a very important role because she was going to be Ken-san's new partner throughout the season. And so she had to hold her own with Ken Watanabe. And we had, I won't name any names, but we had a lot of prominent actresses come in to audition. For most of them, even though they're very well-known and very well-respected actresses, they had not, since maybe they were very young, they have not auditioned. So to come in and have a director session and work with me on the scene and give them direction, have them do it again, and then give them another note and have them do it again was, it was kind of amazing to watch because so many of them at the end would say, I've never done that before, and it was so much fun. They were like, why can't we do this for every role? Because it's really, you're asking the actor to do what they do best, which is to use their instrument to work their way into the role, so.
That sounds exciting. I wish I were younger to apply for.
You could be Nagata.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question. Yes, the gentleman.
Great event. Thank you, Alan, for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
I come from a physical production background, and having done a lot of series work here, I was just curious whether the series format in terms of the number of prep days, number of shoot days, are they pretty much like the way we do it here? The working hours, are they pretty much standard, like 12-hour work days? And are the first assistant directors all bilingual?
That's a really good question. I'll try not to get too deep in the technical weeds, but this is where we had to be hybrid because, yes, the basic idea of prepping and shooting is definitely universal in Japan, but television production there is usually done more simply, and so the fact that we were making something that had the complexity and production value of a movie, but prepping and then shooting, and then while we're shooting, prepping the next episode, and that whole sort of carousel that happens, the assembly line, that was very new. And we had to train our crew to get used to it because they kept saying, first of all, they didn't realize how many people they needed in each department because they needed people to cover the set and other people to cover the prep. And so that was a big adjustment that we had to keep telling people they needed to hire more people. And they also kept asking why we couldn't shut down for a week after every block of episodes. And it was because that is a huge financial loss for the company, whereas it's different in Japan because first of all, there are no unions in the film business, and there's no overtime. Our crew works on a monthly salary. And so that's why we kept the days to 12 hours call to wrap very religiously, but it was because we couldn't compensate people with overtime because there was no mechanism for paying overtime. So we had to respect that they were salaried employees and treat them that way.
Thank you. Yes, to my left.
Hi, I'm a director, and like you, I'm fluent in Japanese. So my question is, do you have plans for a season 3? And,
good question.
That's a really good question.
And also, how do I get hired on it?
Well, first of all, we'll talk after. You can send me your reel or episodes or whatever. But yes, we're always looking for bilingual directors. And yes, I very much hope that we will have a season 3. It's too soon to say because there's a lot of corporate decisions that have to be made. But we've been playing so well on Max this season that I feel very hopeful. So talk to me.
Thank you.
Is there anything we can do to support that? And maybe keep watching or spreading the words that it's a great series. So if people watch it and like it, that might lead to season 3.
Yes, absolutely. Express your enthusiasm, whether it's on social media or I don't think, or I was going to say write letters to HBO, but that's not. That's just going to be an annoyance for some of my colleagues. So. But social media are so important in terms of expressing your enthusiasm. You should, I mean, you know, Max has Tokyo Vice Max as a Instagram tag. And so go to their site, like their things, comment, and it really does help.
Yes, let's do it.
Thank you.
So I guess that we have enough time for one more question. Yes, at the back, sorry.
Hi, thank you. I was a newspaper journalist in Japan, so I enjoyed this TV show a lot, and I missed the days of chasing Yakuza or things like that in my past. Anyway, now I'm working as a producer in this city, and I'm pitching the project based on Japanese culture or the Japanese topic or Japanese hobby, things like that. But I'm always struggling with sharing the context or culture with TV executives in HBO or other companies. So how did you share the Japanese context with the executives or the producing partners or things like that in this project?
Well, that's a really good question. First of all, we had the advantage of having a piece of underlying material, the book, which had been written in English, which everybody could familiarize themselves with. And then we also had J.T. Rogers, a brilliant writer, Tony Award-winning playwright, who was able to write scripts that had so much depth and deeply complex characters in them that it always didn't. The show never read like a standard crime show, but I think that the other thing that made Max such great partners is that when I came on board and when it became a series, I stated very clearly that the show didn't work unless the show worked in Japan, and that would mean there's a certain amount of labor and time, very labor-intensive time that goes into making sure that the language works, making sure that the character's behavior works, making sure that the nuances do not feel off to a Japanese audience, because there have been so many international productions where that has happened. We hear the word iwakan a lot, which means a kind of disharmony that you feel when watching something. And fortunately, Max was very much on board with that. And also we had Wow Wow as a partner that was very much on board with that because they wanted the show to be successful in Japan. And so because of that, I was able to get a lot of trust that there was going to be time and money put into things that would not be apparent to our American partners or to the studio or to the network, but they just trusted that it was necessary because there was a lot riding on the show being successful in Japan.
Thank you. So yes, unless you have any burning question, I guess that we want to close. But well, thank you so very much. So in Japan, Wow Wow releases and it's going to air sometime soon. April. So you're in advance of people in Japan. So we're lucky to see it. But I'm dying to see the episode 6 tomorrow. Is there any way of?
Well, we have a little tease.
Okay.
This is a trailer for the last half of the season that I think is also going to drop tomorrow. And so it's just sort of like a taste of what's to come on the show.
If you don't want any spoiler, then close your eyes and ears.
Yeah, leave now.
This is only the first step in whatever he's planning.
FBI からでどう?
Tozawa owns this guy. Now he's got the FBI in his pocket.
Chase it. Tell no one.
あの悪党を捕まえるためなら何でも掘ってみるといい。君の部下と一緒に。
もし掘った先に我が社とのつながりが見つかったら。
観念しろ。でなきゃ戸沢は千原が寄っただけ潰す。
次に狙われんのはな、お前の兄ちゃんだ。お前が大事にしてる奴ら一匹残らずぶっ殺してやる。
Things are going to get bad. Stay away.
若いと背中流せ。
It is not safe for anyone close to me.
この国の経済を回す側に入ってしまえば、奴らの持ってる全てが俺のもんだ。時間の問題だ。言っただろ。大事なのは忠義だって。
You must stay away. 戸沢のせいなの。終わらせていい？
When we do our jobs, there are consequences.
Be careful.
Don't try and be a hero.
Please tell me you have a plan.
戸沢を落とす証拠を手に入れた。
And yes, you
amazing.
can get Max for $9.99 a month, which is sort
Yes,
of.
if you haven't signed up, please do so. But it's so amazing, so intense and dramatic, and Tozawa never surrenders.
I'm not saying anything. No spoilers here.
Well, thank you so much again for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much, Yuko. It's
Thank
been a great
you.
pleasure.
Yes,
Thank you all.
everyone.
Thank you for the great questions.
Thank you.